Hello everyone, welcome to your lecture on legal ethical issues related to nursing. These are the learning objectives that we will be covering in this lecture. Please review your assigned chapters, which were, I believe, chapters 6 and 7 from your fundamentals textbook. The reading will help you understand the concepts that we're going to cover. What are values? Values are beliefs about the worth of something, about what really matters. They act as a standard to guide one's behavior. A value system is an organization of values in which each is ranked according to importance, and this often leads to a personal code of conduct. They also influence beliefs about human needs, health, illness, the practice of health behaviors, and human responses to illness. What are professional values? We just covered personal values. What about professional values? These mainly include altruism, which is a concern for welfare and well-being of others, autonomy, right to self-determination, human dignity, the respect for inherent worth and uniqueness of individuals and populations, integrity, acting according to a code of ethics and standards of practice, social justice, upholding moral, legal, and humanistic rights. How do we clarify values? What are the three main activities of the valuing process? These include choosing freely from alternatives after careful consideration of the consequence of each alternative. The second step is prizing. Prizing is treasuring. It involves pride, happiness, and public affirmation. And then acting. Acting includes combining your choice into one's behavior with consistency and regularity on the value. Please see chapter 6, page 121 for examples so you can understand these concepts. Ethics. What are ethics? They're a code of action, a process of determining right and wrong. They're decisions guided by beliefs and values. They govern relationships with family and society. They're moral truths that guide thought processes and actions. They're a practical application of moral philosophy. The principles of bioethics are listed in Chapter 6, Table 6.2. They're autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, justice, and fidelity. Autonomy is respecting the rights of patients or their surrogates to make healthcare decisions. The patient always has autonomy to make a decision, and we should respect that. Non-maleficence is avoid causing harm. Beneficence, benefit the patient, and balance benefits against risks and harms. Justice, give each their due, act fairly, be equitable in the care that you provide. Fidelity, always keep your promises. If you tell a patient that you're going to be back in 30 minutes to check on them, be there in 30 minutes. That's fidelity, keeping your promises. What are the Nursing Code of Ethics? A code of ethics is a set of principles that reflect primary goals, values, and obligations of the profession, in this case, the nursing profession. Please take some time to review the Code of Ethics on the International Council of Nurses site and ANA Code of Ethics and the National Student Nurses Association Code of Ethics. These links are clickable through the PowerPoint uploaded in Canvas. Morals. What are morals? A personal philosophy based on what is right, wrong, good, bad. Ethics is a practical way of putting morals into practice, which leads to decision-making and problem-solving. Ethical considerations define our morals that are essential to nursing practice. Ethics and morals. Ethical dilemmas. What are these? These arise when attempted adherence to basic ethical principles results in two conflicting courses of action. Nurses find themselves in ethical dilemmas in nursing practice all the time. Then we have moral agency, the capacity to be ethical and do the ethically right thing for the right reason. Please review the scenario of moral agency that's provided on page 124, box 61. The virtues of a nurse. Nurses should always have certain virtues, human excellences, cultivated dispositions of character and conduct that motivate them to be good human beings. What are those? These include competence, compassionate caring, subordination of self-interest to patient interest, putting the patient first, self-effacement, trustworthiness, conscientiousness, sorry, I cannot pronounce that word, intelligence, practical wisdom, humility, courage, and integrity. The American Nurses Association Code for Nurses includes these 9 components. Please take some time and review this code. It's in your chapter 6 of your fundamentals textbook in table 6.2. Bill of Rights for RNs, the 7th tenets. What are your rights as a future nurse? What are the rights of nurses? Nurses have the right to practice in a manner that fulfills their obligations to society and those who receive nursing care. They have the right to practice in environments that allow them to act in accordance with their professional standards and legally authorized scopes of practice. They have the right to work in an environment that supports and facilitates ethical practice. They have the right to practice freely and openly and advocate for themselves and their patients without the fear of retribution. Nurses have the right for fair compensation for their work. They have the right to work in an environment that is safe for themselves and their patients. They have the right to negotiate the conditions of their employment, either as individuals or collectively in all practice settings. It's very important for us to keep an eye on our moral distress, the level of our moral distress. When nurses are unable to translate their ethical judgments into action, their integrity is compromised and they face moral distress. If this over here shows a brief explanation of how to evaluate the level of moral distress we are feeling. The ANA recommendation for nurses includes nurses should be prepared to recognize ethical dimensions. The American Nurses Association Scopes and Standards of Practice recommendation for ethical decision making is available on their website. Please take some time to review it. Common ethical issues that nurses are faced with on a daily basis includes cost containment issues that jeopardize patient welfare, where you need something to care for a patient, but the hospital cannot provide it to you because of cost containment. Beginning and end of life decisions. This is a huge one. It's very difficult when the patient makes that decision and the nurse has to respect that decision. That's the patient's autonomy. Breaches of patient confidentiality. This is something we have to be very careful of when we're practicing as nurses, to not breach patient confidentiality or share information that we're not allowed to with other people. Incompetent, unethical, or illegal practices by colleagues. And this is the point where we have to advocate for ourselves and our patient, especially if the safety of the patient is jeopardized. What are the steps to ethical decision making? Now, as nurses, we're always faced with ethical dilemmas, and in order to, when we encounter them, in order to solve that problem, we have to follow certain steps. These steps include assessing the situation, diagnose the problem, then plan, identify and weigh alternatives, implement your decision, evaluate your decision. There's an example in your textbook in chapter 6 on page 131, box 6-4. Please review the examples so you can get an idea of how these steps are implemented. What are some ethical considerations that we have to keep in mind? Balance between benefits and harm. Be mindful of disclosures, informed consent, shared decision-making. Involve the family in care. Maintain trusting relationships with the patient. Preserve integrity. Maintain competence. Always improve your competence through improving your skills. Continue personal and professional growth. Educate yourself on evidence-based practices. Consider cost effectiveness and allocation. Don't be wasteful. Provide culturally respectful care. This is very important, and we're going to talk about this topic next week in more detail. Be vigilant to challenge any abuses of power by clinicians. There are some examples of these provided in your textbook on pages 132 and 133. Advocacy. Advocacy is the protection and support of another's right. As nurses, this is very crucial in practice. Nurses who value patient advocacy make sure that their loyalty to their employing institution or colleagues does not compromise their primary commitment to the patient. Remember, the focus of our care is the patient. We have to provide care that is patient-centered. Give priority to the good of the individual patient rather than to the good of society in general. Once again, patient-centered. Carefully evaluate the competing claims of patient autonomy, of self-determination, and patient's well-being. Go ahead and review the advocacy scenario that's provided on page 136 of your textbook. ANA, RNA Action Advocacy. There's a video provided in your Canvas page, and please go ahead and take a look at that video. Legal principles of nursing practice. Nursing is not beyond the law, and it's important for us nurses to understand and know what are the legal principles that guide our practice. These are some important legal terms that you should know. What should the nurse know about the law? Nurses should know the law and the parameters of a nursing license. A nurse should practice within the confines of the law. These legal limits are dictated by the State Nurse Practice Act. State of practice. The Constitution is the law of the land. The statutory laws are legislative laws. For example, licensing, codes, informed consents, living wills, reporting laws, regulatory agencies. Common laws are judge-made laws. For example, court decisions. Administrative laws are administrative agency laws. Example, the State Board of Nursing. These are some legal concepts of nursing practice. Accountability, which is very, very important, is accepting ownership, responsibility to provide nursing care to all, and being accountable for your practice. Responsibility, obligation to accomplish tasks. Accountability is shared. For example, with delegation, you have responsibility and accountability for a patient, and you delegate some tasks. And your accountability is shared with the other person that you've delegated the task to. Let's talk about the Good Samaritan Law. This was designed to protect those who aid victims of emergencies. There are different statutes from state to state. Nurses should know their state's law. Conditions of being protected. If you were to assist somebody who is a victim of an emergency, what will you be protected against? What can you do to be protected? The situation must be an emergency. The care rendered must be free of charge. We can't send a bill to that person later and say, hey, remember me? You got into a car accident and I provided CPR. Here's the bill. We can't do that. Care must be in good faith. Cannot willingly or intentionally harm the victim. It's like, for example, you arrive on a scene of a car accident and you find somebody who you had some personal issues with and you willfully harm them. That is not protected under the Good Samaritan law. It does not protect gross negligence. You can't be negligent. Like, hey, you reach to the scene and you leave the person lying on the street all alone and their cars here and there. You can't be negligent. You have to be, vigilant. You must stay with the victim until stable or another provider with equal or greater training can take over. So you can't just leave the patient unattended. Once you started assisting them, you have to stay there and assist them till you can pass over that care to someone in your equal position or with greater training than you. There's a link here for the Arizona Good Samaritan law. Please go ahead and take some time to review it. Licensure is a credential determined by the State Board of Nursing. It requires completion of a credentialed nursing program, successful completion of the licensure exam, and then this qualifies a person to perform designated skills or services. Negligence and malpractice. Negligence is the performance of an unintentional act or failure to perform an act that a reasonable person would do in a similar situation that results in an injury to another. So this is basically the definition of negligence. If you were charged with negligence, that is what the court will look for. Did you act the way a reasonable person would in a similar situation? So the elements of negligence include duty, what a responsible nurse would do, breach of duty, failure to meet that standard of care, causation. This is the most difficult element of liability to prove. It shows that the failure to meet the standard of care actually caused the injury. Damages, actual harm or injury resulting to the patient. Malpractice is negligence by a professional, failure to carry out or perform duties that result in injury to another. This can occur due to failure to follow standards. You're not following the standards of administering medication. Say you gave the wrong medication to the wrong patient, right? Or you use equipment in an irresponsible manner. For example, you're using a bariatric lift without the help and the patient falls. That's malpractice. Failure to assess and monitor. Failure to assess a post-op patient causing a complication. Communicate. You're not communicating concerns of a discharging patient and the patient is rehospitalized due to unsafe discharge. That's also considered malpractice. Not documenting all the steps taken during a code. Not speaking up or acting when you see a coworker doing something wrong that causes harm to the patient. As nurses, we can reduce the risk of malpractice by practicing within our scope of practice and treating clients with kindness and respect. This is very important to remember. It is also important to recognize our strengths and weaknesses when facing challenges at work. Being kind and respecting a patient is extremely important, and it can actually save us from a lawsuit. Invasion of privacy. What is confidential? Right? All information about the patient's name, identifiers such as address, telephone number, email address, social security number, any other personal information, the reason that the patient is sick or in the hospital, office or clinic, the treatments the patient is receiving, and the information about the patient's past health conditions. So basically everything about the patient is confidential. HIPAA, the patient's rights, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability. HIPAA includes the patient's rights, which include being able to see a copy of their health record, updating their health record, request for corrections of any mistakes, getting a list of the disclosures of a healthcare institution, requesting a restriction on certain uses or disclosures, choosing how to receive health information. HIPAA violations are very serious and are punishable by huge fines and even imprisonment. There's a link on this page. Please click on it to get more information. And on page 151 in your textbook, in chapter 7, box 7.2, there's more information on HIPAA as well. What is invasion of privacy by nurses? What are the things that we do that causes invasion of privacy? Unnecessary exposure of a patient during care. For example, if you're changing a dressing on their shoulder, you don't need to take the whole sheet off and expose their entire body, right? Talking with patients in rooms that are not soundproof. Discussing patient information with people that are not entitled to that information. Pressing the patient for information not necessary for care planning. Interacting with the patient's families in ways that are not authorized by the patient. Using tape recorders or dictating machines or computers, or using your phone to record the conversation, or taking videos. Preparing written or oral class assignments about patients without concealing their identity. For example, when you do your care plan, your assignment for your clinical, make sure that you do not have any patient information on your assignment. That includes their name or date of birth or any patient identifiers. Carrying out research without taking proper precautions to ensure the anonymity of patients. This is some information on false imprisonment and fraud. Fraud, please go ahead and read the slide, but one important thing on this that I would like to talk about is fraud, is the willful or purposeful misrepresentation that could cause or has caused loss or harm to a person or property. Other laws affecting nursing practice. You have the Occupational Safety and Health, the OSHA laws. We have reporting obligations, Arizona reporting obligations. Please click on that link and it will give you a list of things that we are required to report by law. Controlled substances. Nursing responsibilities for controlled substances include storing them in special locked compartments and adhering to specific documentation responsibilities. Restraints. The Nursing Home Reform Act of 1987 states that long-term care facility residents have the right to be free from physical or chemical restraints imposed for the purposes of discipline or convenience that are not required to treat medical symptoms. Please click on the link for the Joint Commission standards to read more about restraints. What is informed consent? It's legal protection of the client's rights. They have the right to choose care and make decisions. It should be required before providing care, except in an emergency situation, when an assumption exists that the client would consent if they're able to. This is called implied consent. Informed consent should meet 3 requirements. The client is able to consent, which means that they're alert and oriented to consent. They must consent freely without coercion, which is voluntary consent, and they should understand the treatment and all related information. The 2 steps of informed consent include providing all the related information about the treatment to the client, and the person performing the procedure should be the one to obtain the consent. This is very important for us to remember because we are faced with these situations as nurses in practice all the time. Please watch the video that I posted in Canvas on informed consent. It has more information about it and might help you understand this concept a little better. Other common legal issues in nursing: organ tissue donation. The person must be legally dead. The decision clinical death is defined as having no brain function, no spontaneous breathing, no response to painful stimuli or even though spinal reflexes may persist. The decision is made in advance or at the time of death by family. Advance directives. This is also a huge issue that we face as nurses in practice all the time. Advance directives document the outline of future care and treatment. They're followed if the client's decision-making power is altered. Incident reports. What are these? These are reports of unusual adverse events. They can be used in legal proceedings. They're used to identify problems and develop solutions. For example, when we have a code, or if the patient falls, or if there is an event, unexpected event, then facilities have different protocols, but they require you to fill out an incident report. Most common allegations that we see out there in nursing and practice: failure to ensure patient safety, improper treatment or performance, failure to monitor and report, medication errors and reactions, failure to follow facility procedure, improper documentation, unsafe equipment use, adverse incidents, discrimination of patients with HIV. Please review page 156, box 7.3 in chapter 7 of your textbook for more information on each. How can a nurse reduce the risk of liability in lawsuits? A smile can save you from a lawsuit. This is something you should remember always as a nurse. Practice within provisions of the State Nursing Practice Act. Follow the ANA Code of Ethics for Nurses and standards of professional practice. Treat every client with kindness and respect. Very important one. Maintain skills and knowledge base by completing continuing education programs. Keep yourself up to date with the best practices. Recognizing personal strengths and weaknesses, and seek help in new situations and challenges. Know yourself, know your strengths and your weaknesses. And when you're faced with a challenge, seek help and do not assume. Risk management. What is the goal of risk management? It's protection of the client, the nurse, and the facility from liability. It includes organizational commitment to employee health and safety, comprehensive worksite risk analysis, employee participation, hazard prevention, control, including waste management. Students are responsible. What about the student nurse? What are the liabilities? How can you protect yourself from liability when you're in a clinical environment? Students are responsible for their own acts. They're held to the same standard of care as a registered nurse. You are also responsible for being familiar with the facility policies and procedures. Always notify instructors in clinical situations if you are unprepared to carry out a procedure. Never perform a procedure if you are unsure of the steps. Even if you feel confident about a nursing task, you risk disciplinary action if you perform a procedure outside the supervised clinical practice setting. Please go ahead and go over the questions. I've provided answers, test your knowledge on the topic, and we will review some more questions and apply this knowledge in class. I'll see you then.